Hey everyone, this is Davey Coombs here at RacerX. I have been tasked with telling a little bit of the history of the first Pittsburgh Supercross, May 13th, 1978. And as it turned out, my parents, Big Dave and Rita, were considered co-promoters along with Alan Becker and C.E. Altman of Pace Motorsports and Paul Schlegel of Delta Motorsports over in Toledo, Ohio. He would ultimately, though, become Dad's partner in the original Loretta Lynn's, the co-creator there. So anyway, Dad had never done anything this big. He'd been to some Supercrosses before, including the first, believe it or not, Philadelphia Trans AMA race back in 1973. It was promoted by Mike Goodwin. It was a nighttime Supercross, and people don't realize that that was really the first Supercross ever in Pittsburgh, but the idea of Supercross had not yet really been invented. So in '78, Dad decided that he was going to participate, and we did a lot of promotions. We rolled up our sleeves, me and my brother and sister and all of our friends in the neighborhood. We put out flyers. We did everything we could that we were allowed to do for the Three Rivers Stadium Authority. So back then, the Pittsburgh Pirates and the Pittsburgh Steelers shared this one stadium called Three Rivers. It was not owned by either, and they were really, anal and adamant about people messing up their AstroTurf. And, it was a fairly new stadium, maybe a half dozen years old. So there was some pushback on the idea of bringing a Supercross onto this, floor of this stadium, especially doing it in the middle of the Major League Baseball season. But just so happened the Pirates had a 13-day road trip where they were going to play 11 games, and that was going to give us time to go in, build the track, have the race, and get everything cleaned up. That was the plan anyway. So everything goes good up until the night before the race, and then it starts raining in the Pittsburgh area. It didn't rain too bad, but it was enough to make the race something of a mutter. There was maybe 34,000 announced attendance, although I think it was probably closer to 40. A real good turnout. Bob Hanna won. It was a real thrilling race at the end. He'd run off the track, spun a donut in the plastic. Marty Tripes passed him, and then on the last lap, Bob passed him back. To 12-year-old me, it was the greatest race in the history of the sport. Couldn't wait for us to do it again. But then the rain continued. And it continued and it continued. And for the next 4 or 5 days, the stadium, we couldn't get the mud out. Try as they might, it turned to soup. And this turned into a big story in the city of Pittsburgh because there were a lot of the old timers who didn't want the Pirates field to be covered with 500 truckloads of dirt, which is exactly what happened. At the time, they wouldn't even let the Pirates or the Steelers paint their logos on the AstroTurf. And if you think about how powerful the Steelers are now and how big they were in 1978, in the middle of that Super Bowl run, the fact that they couldn't even put their logo on Three Rivers Stadium's AstroTurf, you can understand why they were pretty upset about the Supercross. So as the days went on, this became a big citywide story with the local news people, with the local newspapers. There was several newspapers in Pittsburgh at the time. The Press, the Post-Gazette, there was a regional paper, and they took turns sort of covering this unfolding fiasco. Dad was not in charge of getting the dirt out. It was actually a guy ran Three River Stadium's groundskeeping crew. His name was Dirt DiNardo. And if there's ever a movie about Supercross that legitimately explains the story of Supercross, it'd be cool if there was a character named Dirt DiNardo. But anyway, as the days went on, it became clear that there was a real potential that the Pirates were not going to get to play their next game. And they started talking about postponing it, canceling it. And at that point, the Wall Street Journal showed up. This is the big financial paper in the United States, still is to this day. They did a story the first one was called No Joy in Mudville. And then the second one actually was Joy in Mudville because the weather had finally broken and an army of people, including my brother and sister and I, my dad and half of the District 5 and Western PA MX riders who came out to help, literally got the last parts of that dirt out of that stadium by hand. We thought we'd save the day. Then Dad found out that he had lost $50,000 on the promotion. We didn't have $50,000. So we, I think, if I remember correctly, my mom and Dad sort of drew up plans for a new section of our little house out in Cheat Lake and took out a bank loan so they could cover all the bills they incurred doing this Supercross. So needless to say, Pittsburgh was not real happy about bringing us back, even though they did commit for a race in 79. It got pushed to 1980. That got pushed to 81. Finally, in 1983, there was a second Pittsburgh Supercross. It didn't rain. Brock Glover won. And I remember that the rain came as they were again unloading the dirt, taking the dirt out of the building. It caused another big mess. It caused another round of bad newspaper publicity. And at that point, my dad said, hell with it. I'm going to stick to outdoor motocross, GNCC, and this new thing in Tennessee he had going called Loretta Lynn's. So welcome back, Supercross. Obviously, the weather is looking a bit dodgy, but you know, the people who run Supercross now and the Dirtworks crew, they know so much more about putting dirt in a stadium, getting dirt out of a stadium. Everything's going to be covered. Fingers crossed, this will be the biggest Pittsburgh Supercross ever. It sure is trending that way. I just hope it doesn't rain before, during, and especially after. The coolest part about that event, and I'll never forget this. I mean, I loved Bob Hanna. I knew all about Marty Tripes and his big rivalry / friendship. Hanna was on this ongoing streak that started back in the Florida Winter Am Series. I mean, he was almost unbeatable. But Bob came, and I think my dad gave him like $500 to help do early PR. And he had made friends with a family from Greensburg called the Stevensons. And he wanted to come in early anyway, but he decided that he would do any newspaper interviews, any fun thing that they wanted him to do. And one of the things was a foot race. They decided to get all the riders together in the teams. And this is people like Bevo Forte and Keith McCarty and even the announcer, Larry Huffman. And they went out to a local high school by Greensburg, and they had a 2-mile foot race on the Thursday before the Supercross. And like, you couldn't imagine today, like Chase Sexton and Cooper Webb going out and for a jog, a 2-mile run 2 days before the Pittsburgh Supercross. But that's exactly what happened in 1978. I remember getting out of school to go see that. I also remember that even though it rained, they did have an amateur Supercross. And I remember the Friday night before the Supercross, Bob Hanna came and talked to all 1,200 of us amateurs that were raring to go. One of those amateurs was riding a Bultaco, David Bailey. And he ended up winning the pro class. He was still an amateur at the time. And I think it was a glimpse of just who, like, eventually was going to be the champion of this whole series. So that was a lot of fun. I also remember on the last day when we got everything done, everything out, the Pirates are going to get to play. Dirk Denaro came over to my dad and said, hey, Dave, why don't we treat the boys to lunch? You know, everyone works so hard to get all the dirt out and everything. And Dad's like, yeah, absolutely. And he goes, yeah, I'll take care of it. I'll order. Just, give me a check. He goes to a local McDonald's and orders $3,000 worth of food. And this is 1978 prices. And slowly but surely, like, all these people started streaming into the stadium that we'd never seen before. And they were bringing their kids. And that's when it dawned on my dad that they'd called everyone in the union and said, hey, the dirt bike people are buying lunch. And so I'll never forget that, because it was my dad's first taste of big city labor, and a good explanation as to why he would only do 2 of these Supercrosses, and neither were very successful. But to this day, we're still fans of it, and we still have all the memorabilia from the Pittsburgh Supercross. Ironically, we don't have a lot of photos. So if you're watching this and you grew up in Pittsburgh, or got to go out. If you're one of the Western PA Time Machine guys, I know that a lot of you will be there this weekend. We sure would love to see some photos of the 78 and 83 Pittsburgh Supercross, if you have any. There was always talk about it, but you have to remember that whenever a stadium has a really bad experience like Three Rivers did in 78, it leaves a mark on the series' reputation. The same thing happened in Dallas in 1977. In fact, it was maybe the muddiest Supercross nobody ever saw. It was so bad, though, that the Texas Stadium, which was where the Cowboys played, banned dirt events for like the next 7 or 8 years. So Supercross came back to Dallas. They had to go to like the Cotton Bowl, which is this really old place at the Texas State Fairgrounds. It was only after a lot of time and a lot of people left that they were able to bring the race back. But when we did bring Pittsburgh back in 83, this one thing happened. And it was probably every kid who ever raced dream to get to do. There was an amateur race on Sunday, and everything went fine with that. And they were going to start taking the dirt out Monday morning. And then there was a delay for some reason. So my dad called my brother and I, and we were hanging out with a kid named Rodney Smith. Yes, that Rodney Smith, future Hall of Famer, GNCC champion from California. Him and his dad were traveling the series. And Dad said, hey, if you guys want to bring your bikes down here, the track is still sitting intact. And I don't think they'd mind if you guys did a few laps. So my brother on his YZ250, me on my YZ125, and Rodney Smith, I think he was on a Suzuki that year, we got to go out and ride all by ourselves, Three River Stadium on the 83 Supercross track. We must have ridden for 2 hours. And at that point, I thought my future was going to be as a Supercross racer. And then I saw Rodney Smith and I realized that I'd never had a chance. Well, I think that, when you live in the Northeast, and I've lived here my whole life, you always dream about more Supercross races. But, the truth is that you have to finish the series by the middle of May. And it can be cold and windy and snowy when you get up into Pennsylvania and New Jersey, and especially New England, during the months of March and April. So it's a lot of chance that Feld took in doing this 4-race swing. We were thrilled about it. Matty Rice has been going to all 4. I think he even took a train to one of them. But the gamble is the weather. And we saw in Foxborough, they dodged a bullet in Philly. I thought that I thought Meadowlands was great last weekend in East Rutherford. And, fingers crossed that Pittsburgh, the grand finale of this, 1 month Northeastern swing, will be successful enough that we see it for plenty of years to come. But you know what? We're at the whim of Major League Baseball. Depending on what their schedule looks like in 2026, 2 of these races might not be able to come. And one of the things that people always ask me about is, why are there all these open air stadiums in the north? And yet all the covered stadiums, are kind of in the south. Well, that's because if you're an NFL team and you make the playoffs, the greatest advantage you can have is a cold weather home game. And you gamble for that. And you put your fans at risk that the weather's going to be bad or whatever. But you have an advantage, because when the Miami Dolphins go to, Green Bay, or the Arizona Cardinals go to Seattle, the home team has an inherent advantage, especially, in the playoffs in January and February. So there's when you think about the real dynasties of the NFL, a lot of them are those cold weather teams that play in open air stadiums, like the Green Bay Packers, like the Chicago Bears, like the Pittsburgh Steelers, Philly, the New York Giants, the New England Patriots. They have open air stadiums because they want to win Super Bowls, not because they want dry dirt bike races.